So, what got you into doing drag?
Ooh, that's a complicated question.
First question.
I think I first learned about drag when I was a college student. This is the early 2000s. And I just became utterly fascinated with it. And then I would look for queer identities and presentations in like popular culture. At that time, we were limited to America's Next Top Model and like similar TV shows that I think now we look back at and see as problematic, but those were the only types of TV shows that had femme queer presentation. And then I started, when I turned 21, going to bars and seeing drag in local scenes, whether it was back in my hometown of Miami or here in the Midwest. I have very strong memories of spending a summer in Minneapolis and spending a lot of time at the Gay 90s, seeing Bibi Zahara Benet, who was the first winner of RuPaul's Drag Race several times there before she was ever on the show. And so it just became a fascination. I'm a college professor. I went straight to grad school from undergrad to get my doctorate in art history, and drag was always a thing I loved and was fascinated by and even fantasized about doing, but could never see myself doing. And I actually didn't start doing drag until 2016, which is the year I moved to Iowa and started teaching at a college here. The year before, I had lived in Miami and lived in a queer house, and a lot of my friends were bartenders, drag performers, DJs, like weird queer creatives. And I was just living in a house where we would, at a once a month party called Counter Corner, do really eclectic weird drag. And I started making costumes. And when I moved to Iowa, I was like, I want to keep my queer family and I feel comfortable and safe in this space. So let me try drag out. And that's how my drag character was birthed, Lolita Cabrón. I actually conceived her when I was writing my dissertation on the Cuban Revolution. I like to say she's a femme fatale. She's a revolutionary and a tragic figure, and ideally a shaman. So it was through studying the history and politics of the Caribbean that I sort of developed this unique and animated drag character.
I love that. Could you spell that for me?
Lolita Cabron. It's Lolita and then Cabron, which is a bad curse word in Spanish, by the way, depending on what country you're in. Because Puerto Rico, it also means like fucking awesome. So it has that like double meaning. Cabro with an accent N.
I love that. What does being a drag performer mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it means a lot. I think drag I know there's a famous RuPaul saying you're born naked and the rest is drag, but I think drag is so much more than that. It's the sort of space where we could sort of create and fabulate and comment on not just our gender identities, but I think gender expression is a huge part of drag in some ways. We do live in this sort of binary patriarchal system, and I think drag can be and often is an FU to that, even though it could sometimes fall into the biases of society. So I think like drag is a art form that is inherently performative, but also visual. Um, and it's a way for us to, while it's not exclusive to queer people, a way for us to express queer identity. I also see drag as potentially, for a lot of queer people, being a space of healing. Um, Ways we were denied to express ourselves. It's also a way to think of our broader position in society. I think drag often corresponds to the order of our society in many ways. Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'm originally from Florida, which has also become a red state. I have the tragedy of having lived in purple states that all become red. I've also lived in North Carolina, which will is the most likely purple state this year, North Carolina. Iowa and Florida, sometimes I feel like are lost causes. Um, but no, that's a really good question. The first time I ever did drag in Iowa was actually at the college where I teach. I did an alumni drag show, and then twice a year, me and another professor get in drag in our small town, and we raise money for different causes. For example, last time we raised money for the Emma Goldman Clinic and Iowa Safe Schools and raised about $2,500. So it's kind of amazing to see what small town drag can be. So I feel like I don't view it as I'm doing drag in a red state. I'm just doing drag. At the same time, as the politics have changed in the state, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, I do think that it does feel less safe and perhaps more demoralizing to be queer in the state. I think particularly with the anti-trans laws. I remember going out to one of the protests in front of the Capitol, and I feel that drag has also become a center of community more. I teach a class at my college on drag. It's for first year students. It's called And the Rest is Drag. And in 2019, when I taught it, the students felt like drag was mainstream. They felt that drag didn't have the political potential that I thought it did. And it was through teaching and discussing different kinds of drag that I think students began to see drag in this complicated way. When I taught that class in 2023, students immediately thought of drag as political. There's this reality with the expansion of anti-drag and anti-trans laws. I think among queer people, we no longer see drag as a safe thing. It's alongside and because of transphobia, I think it's becoming attacked by the right wing, and it's again becoming symbolic of the forefront for our rights as queer people. So I think it's actually an exciting moment to do drag because as drag has become mainstream and more accessible, I think we're in a moment where we're being reminded that queer bodies and lives aren't safe. So I see a sense of joy and excitement about those when they find their safe spaces within these red states. To fully express themselves and see the potential. And performances don't have to be specifically political; they've just become political in this context. So I think it's an interesting moment to do drag, and I embrace doing it in a red state.
What is your hope as a performer to bring to the future of Iowa or simply to the community?
That's a good question. It's interesting because I stopped doing drag in 2020 during the pandemic. And I moved back and I've been slow. So when I was performing at the Garden Open Stage, that was my first time ever performing in Des Moines. And I told myself I want to try to do at least a thing a month, and it's more for my own creative development and well-being. What was the question again?
What is your hope as a performer to bring to the future of Iowa or simply the community?
Oh, okay. Um, should I start over?
Either one, whatever.
uh, I'll start over. I have to bring it back to community. Okay, so it's like it's a little bit of mental gymnastics, and the nervousness of
You're
it.
great at speaking. I'm like,
I'm a college professor. I'm paid to do this shit.
you've been practicing.
I have been practicing. It's all performance. Don't be that impressed.
I'm very impressed.
Thank
I'm
you.
like the worst speaker in the world.
And it's funny because I think I come out as an extrovert because people think I like to speak a lot, but I'm actually kind of a homebody and an introvert. Like I go out to the bar maybe once or twice a week, and I
Mhm.
fucking love the saddle. I think it's amazing,
Yeah.
but I never have the energy. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Question. Okay. What do I hope my drag brings to the future of Iowa community, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start where I started before. That's a good question. I actually stopped doing drag in 2020, like several people did, and only recently started doing it again, especially as I moved back to Iowa a couple years ago. And so the performance I did at the Garden was open stage night, was my first ever Des Moines performance. And I told myself this summer that I have a goal to do at least one performance a month just to get my feet wet with creativity, finding the therapeutic value in drag, and also building community. That night, I got to meet other performers who are at the open stage, and so just to sort of open up and expand, sort of my connection to this community. So I think I'm still new to Des Moines and want to think through that. But I think as someone who's also an educator and works in the realm of arts and culture, I'm interested in connecting drag worlds and what's happening in drag to sort of other things, whether it's at the academic or university level. When I taught my drag class last time, I invited the cast of Covered in Melanin to perform in Grinnell, to make students aware of some of the cool, because Des Moines has a really amazing drag scene. So as a drag performer, my ambitions are small. They're just self-fulfillment. But as an educator and leader, my goal is to better connect to that drag world so I could find ways that it could sort of come into these other worlds, whether it's the museum or academic world that I have my feet in as well, to build collaboration and community.
My last question is if you could say something to Governor Kim Reynolds, what would you say?
Suck corn. No, that's the Iowa Safe School spin. Hold up.
Is it?
Hold up. I have it here. Don't I? Yes. And I love this. This is from the Anita Byron. This is inspired. This is pins created by Iowa Safe Schools. They came to one of our Grinnell drag shows, and we're handing these out. And this is inspired by the um, famous campaign against Anita Bryant. For those who aren't familiar with Anita Bryant, she was a Florida orange juice spokeswoman who went around the nation as different, particularly cities. Miami's the most famous example. Miami-Dade County passed an ordinance for LGBTQ people to be protected from discrimination, particularly in the workplace. And then she advocated against it, and she was very much someone horribly against gay rights. And famously, when she came to Des Moines, Iowa, she was pied in the face. But one of the campaigns against her was Anita Bryant sucks oranges, so suck corn, Kim Reynolds.
I haven't seen that in that. That is so fantastic. I love that. That's great. Let me fix that camera. I don't know what I did. Okay. La, 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 la. Is there anything else in like your story or anything you want to share? All these big questions. I took time to think of these
No,
questions.
those are really good. I feel like I actually gave you like a well-rounded
You did.
idea of what my perspective on drag is. If I get into more detail, I loved ending with this because this is something Iowa
I
specific
love that.
too.
I love that.
But yeah, no, I think yeah, and I think I said in there that I'm like I really like Des Moines drag because that's another. I think this when I first moved here, this is
Turn it off.